When Dr. Elias Monroe vanished into the blinding white of Alaska's Aurora Glacier, everyone thought it was just another tragic expedition gone wrong. But 5 years later, his body was found perfectly preserved, seated upright inside the ice, surrounded by 7 unlit lanterns, each buried like a ritual offering. His recorder was still running, whispering through the static, "The glacier isn't melting. It's alive." Investigators say the ice held more than a body. It held a secret someone had tried to freeze forever. Before we go any further, if this is your first time here, we'd love for you to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Your support means the world and helps us bring you even more powerful stories. Stick with us until the end. And if this mystery moves you, share your thoughts in the comments and pass it along to a friend. You meet people who move like they're tuned to the weather, not just aware of it, but in rhythm with it. Dr. Elias Monroe was one of those people. He had a slow, tidy way of doing things, rolling a thermos lid between his fingers, checking a seam twice before sewing it shut, tying his boots the same double knot every time. He spoke softly, not because he lacked conviction, but because his conviction didn't need noise. Folks in the town said he listened to the glacier, like other people listened to hymns. In late September 2018, Elias set out for a week alone on the Talkeetna Glacier Basin. He was on a narrow mission: collect core samples from a pocket he'd flagged months earlier, data that, if his hunch was right, would prove unnatural contamination in the ice. He left a detailed route with Nora Klein, the park ranger who worked with him and who knew the glacier's moods like the back of her hand. Nora saved his last coordinates on her handheld, thumb tracing the dots like prayer beads. "If you don't check in on day 8, she told him, half joking, "I'm hauling your stubborn self back." He smiled and said, "Bring the coffee." Elias packed with the sort of precision that looks calm, but is actually a kind of love. Insulated core tubes snug in foam, a battered field notebook with margins full of tiny calculations, a hand-crank lantern whose glass was clouded with micro-scratches from years of use. He loaded a compact GPS beacon, extra batteries, freeze-dried meals, a small first aid kit. His gloves smelled of the same cheap petroleum that always seemed to find its way inside park gear. He kissed the map with a fingertip, shrugged his parka hood onto his shoulders, and vanished into the white. The first 2 days passed with radio check-ins that sounded like routine: measured timestamps, weather reports, the soft click of crampons on ice. But on the 7th sunrise, his message carried a strain. Not panic, just an edge. He mentioned a surprise in the readings. A layered inclusion he hadn't expected, something the charts didn't show. "I'll take deeper cores," he said. "If I don't call in on the 8th, start the search." Nora promised. She scribbled coordinates in the station log and tucked the note into her breast pocket. When the 8th morning came and Elias didn't call, the base moved. Nora organized a small response: 2 snowmobiles, a rescue pilot who knew the Talkeetna winds, and a county search team that smelled of cigarettes and good intentions. The town rallied in its quiet way, not with banners, but with mugs set down on diner counters and gossip that flattened into prayer. "He's careful," one fisherman said. "If he's gone, it's because the mountain chose it." Another, a mechanic who'd sold Elias tent pegs once, snorted, "Or he found something and got himself stuck." Conversations like these drifted between the hardware and the post office, half hope, half looming dread. They found his camp on the 4th day. Tent zipped, stove cold but not dead, a drying line with gloves like small flags. A cup sat with coffee gone too quickly cold, a smear of grounds like a punctuation mark. The weirdness, the thing that lodged in Nora's chest like a stone, was the lantern. It was still burning, not smoldering, not dying, a steady, small light in the yawning white. It should have gone out if no one tended it. The chair beside it was pressed back as if the sitter had risen and stepped outside with intent. Outside the tent, the boot prints led away in a line that at first looked deliberate, purposeful, the measured stride of a man with crampons and a plan. Then the pattern shifted. The steps narrowed, blurred, and then they stopped. Not at a drop-off, not at a known crevasse. They stopped at a patch of ice that looked unusual, glassy, almost buffed to a sheen as if something had been polished there. The searchers probed with poles, peered into faint seams, felt for hollows with the tips of gloved fingers. There was a shallow lip, a deceptive fold in the glacier that could hide a small cavern if you weren't looking close. The pilot radioed that the weather was turning ugly, gusts building like a hand. A whiteout could come in a single breath out here. The decision to pull back was bureaucratic and human, safety, risk, insurance. But for Nora, it felt like being asked to stop a clock mid-tick. She sat on a burl of snow and tasted metal at the back of her mouth. People argued in low voices near the machines. Go in now. We can't risk more lives. The town's barista later said, you could see the split in everyone's face. Keep vigil or push the slope. Gossip wrapped around grief like a wool blanket. He'd never get careless, someone whispered. He knew the ice. Another voice, harsher, muttered, maybe he ran into someone's business. That last line did not sit quietly. It tasted like accusation. The official log would later say the search ended due to impracticable conditions. The file closed with a somber stamp. Presumed fatality. The county prosecutor signed off. Photographs were cataloged and put in a folder. Community volunteers went back to their jobs. Hale Dynamics put out a statement expressing regret and promising to comply with any further inquiries. Victor Hale's name appeared in the town's conversations more as background noise than as accusation. A rich man with a slick smile and permits that bent like reeds in wind. Most people accepted the county's conclusion. Some, like Nora, did not. Nora returned to the tent after the machines left. Her hands moved in small, strict rituals. She lifted the cup, checked the radio, held the burning lantern close to her face and watched the soot inside its glass swirl into tiny constellations. The soot didn't look like a simple overnight burn. It looked like a message, or the trace of one. She pressed the map Elias had given her to her chest and whispered, "Don't go without telling me why." The wind took the faint sound and shredded it into silence. Town talk evolved, as it always does. The diner's chatter threaded with new theories. Maybe he found contamination and got sick. Maybe this is all just nature. A retired miner shrugged and said, "A glacier will take you if you let it." A young activist snapped, "He was on to Hale." The voices braided together, accusation, pity, denial. And somewhere under those words sat a quiet, unyielding question. What had Elias been hunting under the ice? And who would want that secret buried? Act 1 ends with that unanswered question, with the image of a small lantern burning alone in a tent, and with Nora kneeling on the moraine, the snow pressing cold through her knees, repeating the coordinates until they tasted like prayer. The glacier watched, patient as a thing older than memory. The town folded the story into its life. And in the white hush, a single fact settled. Someone had gone into the ice and not come out. The way he left, careful, deliberate, made the absence feel deliberate too. When the official search wound down, the town folded itself back into routine like nothing had happened. Except for a few things. A chair left half pulled out, a thermos with a lipstick ring forever on its rim, and a map Nora Klein kept staring at until the paper softened under her fingertips. Nora was 29, lean, with a ranger's patience. She could read ice like other people read faces. For her, the silence after Elias Monroe vanished felt wrong in her bones, like a radio that should be singing, but only hissed. At first the chatter was practical, noisy with good intentions. Volunteers layered up, trudged the ridgelines, checked soft spots with poles. People in the diner swapped binoculars and winter boots like talismans. A mechanic who'd fixed Nora's snowmobile muttered, "He's careful. You don't lose a man like Elias unless the mountain takes him." A teacher at the school said, "Maybe he found contamination and got sick." And the sentence hung, half accusation, half hope. Gossip did what gossip always does. It tried to explain the unexplainable by leaning on something comfortable. Weeks turned into months. Nora drove the same road to the ranger station every morning, logged nothing and everything into a little ledger, dates, wind direction, ice scent. She carried Elias's last GPS printout in her park jacket and would sometimes trace the route with a finger, until the skin on her fingertip glowed white from pressure. The town did vigils on anniversaries. Lanterns held small against the cold, faces bright in the light. People whispered theories. Corporate cover-up, bad luck, he fell into a hidden sink. Victor Hale's name drifted through those whispers like smoke. Hale Dynamics was hiring. Trucks rumbled up service roads, machines marking the landscape with new scars. "They're good for jobs," a diner regular said, "but you don't open the earth and not expect trouble." Another scoffed. "You think they'd stoop to murder?" The back and forth was low and constant. Online, a different kind of search brewed. A grad student who'd assisted Elias posted scans of his field notes. Forums bloomed with takes. Some were tender, piecing through his handwriting for clues. Others were venomous, calling him gullible or worse. Threads would flare for a day, then go cold, a new headline blunting the old outrage. Still, occasionally, a stray comment landed in Nora's inbox. "We found a post about unusual cores. Look at this anomaly." She followed leads like a breadcrumb trail. A hiker's blurred photo. A fisherman's story of rusty flakes in a stream. Each lead felt promising until it didn't. Years do something to people. Some hardened into cynicism, certain that everything had a tidy, ugly explanation. Others softened into a steady insistence, the kind Nora embodied, that questions deserved answers. She volunteered on small expeditions when weather allowed, not full-blown searches. Those were too risky, too expensive. These were methodical returns to the margins Elias had circled, a careful probe here, a hand feel of crevasse lip there. She learned the glacier's new vocabulary, the way a melt line swells in late afternoon, the smell of thaw that's not just water, but sediment, a metallic tang that didn't belong. Meanwhile, Hale Dynamics expanded loud and legal. They put up banners for jobs, donated to the school, sponsored the local hockey team. People softened toward them. Others felt the company's presence like a bruise. Victor Hale, 52, smooth in interviews, spoke often of stewardship and progress. "We follow the science," he'd say on a broadcast, smiling as if nothing else mattered. But behind closed doors, permits were quietly adjusted, corridors extended. A document Nora once managed to slide from a municipal file, a slip, a clerical error, showed Hale's team had requested confidential drilling along the western moraine, coordinates overlapping Elias's last survey. When Nora found it, she felt the floor tilt under her. That tilt gathered shape in small-town conversations. At the barbershop, someone muttered, "You see those rigs? They're going where Elias was working." At the co-op, a woman argued, "Jobs keep our kids here." An old miner said, "Nature's not a bank. You take too much, it gets sore." People argued and then apologized like neighbors. The conversations resembled gossip only in tone. The stakes were real and practical: shelter, salary, safety. Detective Rhea Voss entered the scene quietly, like a book opening to a serious page. Rhea was 38, precise, and she had an instinctive suspicion of corporate tidyovers. She wasn't local, sent in from the regional office after a new tip lit up the county line, but she read the town easily. She met Nora in the ranger station 6 months after the case closed. Rhea had a file in her hands, a habit of watching eyes rather than asking questions at first. She listened to Nora's ledger and watched the way Nora's fingers trembled over the GPS printout. "You think it's foul play?" someone in town asked, as if the question itself might summon it. "I think it's unexplained," Rhea answered carefully. "And unexplained things deserve attention." Rhea's involvement changed the texture of waiting. Her questions were small and exacting. Who saw Elias last? Who had access to his unpublished findings? Which trucks were logged near the moraine that week? She pulled records, cross-checked permits, and quietly subpoenaed Hale Dynamics maintenance entries. She discovered a handful of gas station receipts showing a company truck near the ridge the day Elias disappeared. She filed them like stones in a pocket, not yet ready to toss them. Still, the town moved on in its daily rhythm. Seasons shifted. Melt patterns altered roadbeds. The river that fed the town ran muddier some years. Nora kept her vigil in quiet ways. Sometimes she'd stand at Elias's favorite overlook, folded arms against the wind, breath making ghosts in the air. She kept a tiny notebook where she copied newspaper clippings, receipts, odd notes. Years of nothing had a peculiar weight. Each new rumor or undeniable fact felt like a wind that might, eventually, clear the path to truth. There were small human moments threaded through the long silence. At the grocery, Nora overheard two women trading theories while choosing apples. One said, "Maybe he found something that scared him." The other answered, "You always go too deep, Nora." Nora smiled, adjusted her tote, and left the apples in a different basket. In line at the gas station, Rhea bought coffee, then handed it to an old man who'd been at the early searches. "Thanks," he said, surprised. Rhea nodded. These little exchanges stitched the town together and kept the case from becoming only paperwork. And beneath all that, the glacier kept moving, slow, cruel, patient. It shifted the landscape inch by inch. A scar would bloom where a ridge once lay. By 2023, the ice had receded enough that new features began to show. Exposed pockets, melt tunnels, odd glassy patches that hadn't existed before. The change wasn't dramatic. It was incremental, the glacier's slow confession, and it shaped the next step in a way no single headline could. People began to say quietly, "Maybe when the ice pulls back, we'll finally know." And for the first time in a long time, that hope felt like a tide, coming in slow but inevitable. When ice starts to unmake itself, it does so like an old thing waking. Not loud, not dramatic, but with small sounds that gather meaning if you listen long enough. By 2023, the Talkeetna Basin had been bleeding for months. Melt tunnels widened, ridges sunken, new slick fissures that hadn't been on maps the year before. The glacier was revealing secrets in increments, like a page turning one slow millimeter at a time. It was a maintenance crew from a contractor working a seasonal access route who found the first sign. They were regrading a service road when a backhoe hit a sheet of glassy ice. The operator cursed into his radio, then eased the bucket down curious. The scoop came up with a shape trapped in the blue, a curve of metal, the edge of a case peeking out like a jaw. Word spread through the crew in a kind of stunned whisper. Someone thought it might be old equipment. Someone suspected tourist debris. Someone else, quieter, said the word that had never left Nora Klein's mouth. Monroe. Nora heard that whisper before sunrise. She was already driving toward the ridge, boots tapping brittle on the floorboard as the truck crawled up the service road. The air smelled of thaw and diesel. It tasted like old secrets. When she arrived, the scene looked ridiculous and solemn at once. Men in high-visibility vests clustered like churchgoers, breathing clouds of steam. Work trucks idling like beasts. A backhoe arm lifted, and where it had dug, a cavity opened to reveal a pocket in the ice. Not just a chunk, but a hollowed room, a chamber frozen in blue. They extracted a metal case small enough to carry but heavy with the kind of gravity that feels like history. It bore a faded label, E. Monroe, Field Kit. Nora's throat went dry. Her hands moved on their own, fingers tracing the letters as if they might warm them alive. They wrapped the case in thermal blankets and brought it to the ranger station, where the heater hummed like a nervous animal and reporters already hovered, cameras red on. Inside the case were things that made the room tilt. A field notebook with the corner chewed by repeated thought, a hand-crank lantern with soot on its glass, a GPS beacon, and a small digital recorder. There were also 4 glass vials, each labeled in Elias's neat script, small notes about layers and residues. But something else was missing. The bulky backpack he'd always carried, the survival kit, the spare batteries. Those weren't there. They opened the recorder first. The device clicked awake, static flaring, then Elias's voice. Close, brittle, the cadence of someone talking in cold air. Day 7. Found inclusion at stratum 47b, not organic in the way we expect. Fibrous, metallic, feels like wiring. If I don't make it, this is why. He inhaled. The breath sounded enormous over the small speaker. If anyone hears this, check the veins. They run under the extraction map. It's not melting. It's being drawn. The clip clipped off, a long, wet silence following. like a held breath released. That message alone could have started an inquiry. But what followed made the hair at the back of everyone's neck stand up. A field photo tucked between pages, taken at twilight, its edges frosted. In it, Elias sat cross-legged on a low bench of ice in a shadowed hollow, his coat caked with hoarfrost. In front of him, arranged like a small altar, were 7 lanterns set in a neat semicircle. They were dark in the photo, unlit, but their glass showed signs of heat. Fine crystallized soot in identical patterns across each pane, like a code. Around Elias, the ice had been carefully scraped smooth. Someone had cleared his space like laying out a stage. The image traveled through town by rumor before it could be printed. At the diner, 2 regulars argued over coffee. "Why 7?" one asked. The other shrugged. Maybe he was counting days. People who knew Elias nodded. He was ritualistic enough to arrange things like that. Others, less kind, said, maybe he was trying to call something up. Gossip braided with dread, and then with a sharper edge of accusation. Why were the lanterns there and unlit? Why was his pack missing? Why did the soot show an identical burn pattern on each? Detective Rhea Voss was already on the next plane out. She arrived with a notebook, a practiced silence, and a look that meant business. Rhea listened to the recorder twice, then a third time, watching how the words changed the set of Nora's face. She walked the frozen verge where the case had been found, eyes trained on the subtle geometry of the ice. A crescent of disrupted layers here, a thin seam like a vein running along the bedrock there. Her fingers traced the map coordinates Elias had left in the notebook and then moved to overlay them with Hail Dynamics public permits. The match was not perfect. It draped like a shadow, not an exact outline. But the pattern was enough. They returned to the discovery site with a probe team and a forensic sled. The chamber from which the case had been pulled was not an accident of melt. It was a small, deliberate cavern, its walls smoothed and scraped by tools, not collapse. Near the far wall, preserved in clear ice, the searchers found the impossible. A human form, seated, torso slightly tilted forward, face fossilized in blue. The scalp was pulled close to bone. The features were intact in a way that made eyes feel like watching. It was Dr. Elias Monroe. He sat as if on a bench. Around him, precise, ritualistic, were 7 lanterns, each embedded in the ice rim, their glass dark and soot-laced. His hands rested on his knees. The recorder was clipped to his coat, and small scores of frost patterned the fabric like lace. There was no sign of trauma, no blunt wound that answered what had happened. His valuables, a small wallet with cash and an old ring, lay untouched nearby, but anything that looked like survival gear was gone. It read like an impossible puzzle. Someone had moved him to that place. Someone had set the lanterns. Someone had... And here, the investigators felt the quietest, most chilling possibility, left him to whatever the Glacier would do. The forensic team worked with tender, surgical patience. They noted the soot patterns, the arrangement of the lanterns, the absence of sleep debris in the hollow Elias occupied. They cataloged footprints in the immediate perimeter. 2 sets that did not belong to rescue crews, one heavier, measured, another lighter and quick, like someone who'd hustled. Photographs were taken, samples carefully boxed. Nora stood at the edge of the cordon and rubbed her hands together until her knuckles went white. She mouthed the coordinates aloud until they landed like prayer. In the days that followed, threads began to form. The metal case, the recorder, the photograph, these were concrete. The missing pack, the lanterns, and the way Elias was seated like a man who had been told to wait. Those were questions. Detective Rhea Voss filed requests for Hail Dynamics access logs for the week of Elias's disappearance. She ordered lab analysis on the soot, the sediment from the ice near the lanterns, and the vials found in the kit. The town swelled with people who wanted to look. Journalists, activists, a handful of scientists with grim faces. Victor Hale, when asked for comment, released a statement expressing sympathy and offering cooperation. The same public line corporations always deploy, silk over steel. But in the cold, The photograph of Elias with the 7 lanterns kept circling people's thoughts. Why 7? Was it a ritual, a countdown, an offering? The image burned more questions than it answered, and in the marrow of everyone who saw it, a new fear took root. Someone had placed a man inside the glacier and left the light to go out. On the third night, Nora sat alone in the ranger station and played the recorder again. Elias's voice crackled through the small speaker, thin and strange. They're drawing it out. They're following the veins. She put her forehead to the wooden table and felt the paddles of her own breath like small alarms. Outside, the glacier sighed. Inside, a town that had learned to live with absence felt its old loss rearrange into something like accusation. Act 3 closes on that image. Elias, frozen in a blue chamber, 7 dark lanterns arranged like markers, a town circling the discovery with the slow hunger of people who want answers. Detective Rhea Voss, now fully engaged, had a file that would not sit quiet. The law was coming. So was the inquiry. And somewhere below, the glacier kept its slow, immutable rhythm like a heart unwilling to let go. Detective Rhea Voss arrived like a quiet storm, precise, watchful, and unwilling to be placated by corporate niceties. She wore no badge on her parka at first, just a notebook and a look that made people tidy their lies. She met Nora Klein in the ranger station, where the heater hummed and the walls smelled faintly of coffee and cold leather. Nora handed her Elias Monroe's recovered field kit, the notebook, the recorder, the photograph with the 7 lanterns. Nora's hands were steady now, a careful, practiced calm that hid a long, slow grief. Rhea opened the recorder and listened again, letting the static wash over the room until Elias's voice cut clear. She read the pages, too. Elias's margins full of tiny, furious script, coordinates circled, a line underlined where he wrote, "Vein tracks along Western Moraine. Overlap with contractor survey." The detective's jaw tightened. Small things fell into place the way beads fall into a pattern. She started with paper, permits, shipping manifests, payroll slips. Corporations have a rhythm, approvals, invoices, coffee orders. If someone tries to hide, they still produce paper. Hail Dynamics was no exception. Rhea pulled delivery logs for the month surrounding Elias's disappearance and found a cluster of entries that didn't match the public rollout. Untagged boxes, miscellaneous equipment, and a late-night requisition from Victor Hale himself, signed on his tablet. The item description was maddeningly vague. Containment accessories. Rhea's next move was local. She walked into the only place in town where people lowered their voices and the truth surfaced in fragments, the bar at the gas station. There she met Marcus Trent, a former field tech for Hail Dynamics, cheeks raw from too much wind and whiskey. He looked the part of someone who'd worked in cold places too long. Ragged gloves, sunburned nose, hands that never stopped fiddling. Marcus's eyes flicked to Elias's photograph, and he blinked. "Those lanterns," he said finally, voice low. "We moved a pallet of those for Hale. Cheap glass, but they're treated. Heat stable. We were told to deliver them to the Western Corridor. Night drop. Boss said it was for timing operations." He laughed once, nervous. Timing, like a countdown. Rhea didn't smile. She wrote Marcus's words down and watched his micro-movements, the way he rubbed his thumb over a callus, the way he avoided looking at his own hands. He told her about a freight manifest he'd kept, a habit, and later produced a crumpled receipt from a gas station 40 miles from town, time-stamped the day Elias disappeared. The vehicle ID on the form matched a Hail Dynamics logistics van. Small, honest things that made a trail. Next came surveillance video from a gas station 2 towns over. It was grainy, a dark van, a man in a heavy coat getting out, loading something into the cargo area. Rhea froze the frame and blew it up on her tablet. The face was indistinct, but the gait, that certain way of walking with purpose, matched a corporate driver seen in another frame at the Hale compound. She began to map movement, vans, routes, times. The pattern pushed at her like a hand from under a blanket. Forensics added salt to the wound. The soot on the lantern glass, examined under microscopes, showed identical burn signatures, not the casual, uneven marks of backcountry use, but the precise residue left by a particular fuel additive used in industrial lanterns purchased by Hale Dynamics the month prior. Soot chemistry is as unique as handwriting when you know what to look for. Rhea watched the lab notes with growing impatience. The vials recovered from Elias's kit, meanwhile, contained traces of a coolant compound registered to a Hale Dynamics supplier. Little notches on invoices matched lot numbers on the empty containers found back at a now-sealed staging area. When Rhea presented these findings at a closed-door meeting, Victor Hale's corporate counsel smiled the smile professionals wear when the walls are closing in. Hale himself arrived later, clean-shaven, expensive coat buttoned, charm parked up front like armor. He talked about stewardship, about investment in safety, about the need for calm and context. He said all the right things, and his voice slid across the room like oil. But Rhea had bones in the ground to back her up. She told him about the manifest, the gas receipts, the lab matches. She told him about Marcus's admission, the night drops, the palette of lanterns, the insistence on discretion. Hale's jaw tightened, a micro-expression the cameras would miss. He offered a terse, corporate apology and then, in a move that smelled of panic, released a curated set of internal logs that seemed designed to reassure. All activity is documented, the press release said. No foul play. That was a performance. Rhea felt it. She dug deeper. A breakthrough came when a maintenance worker, Rosa Jimenez, who'd been quietly cataloging equipment at the Hale compound, slipped and told a friend she'd seen a discarded backpack in a company incinerator the week after Elias vanished. She'd never reported it. Fear and loyalty are cheap currencies in small towns with big employers. But when Rhea sat down with her and offered protection, Rosa's face crumpled. She led them to a storage locker where, under a false floor, she had stashed evidence. A backpack missing its survival contents, but with a smear of fabric fibers matching Elias's jacket and a residue of the same industrial coolant found in the Glacier samples. Rhea felt the room tilt. The backpack told a story. Items removed, valuables left, a purposeful stripping of survival tools. Someone had wanted Elias, unable to survive, conscious or not. The lanterns? A psychological element, a number arranged to measure time, to count down. Confronted with the growing weight of evidence, Hale Dynamics first fought in courtrooms by stall and by statement. But people don't keep secrets forever. Marcus Trent, under pressure and worried for his own skin, agreed to testify. In a small room between coffee and legal warnings, he said, Victor wanted Monroe intimidated, not harmed. He told us to make him feel like he had nowhere to run. His voice broke then, and he repeated a detail that landed in the detective's notebook like a hammer. Marcus had driven a company vehicle up the service road the morning Elias left, carrying lanterns and a small kit marked for field calibration. He'd been told to wait while Victor took a walk with the kits. Marcus swore he didn't see the rest. Rhea brought Marcus's testimony and Rosa's stash to Victor Hale in a controlled interview. Hale sat like a man whose life was built of glass and who'd been told the wind would be gentle. Rhea read items off a page: receipts, rope, coolant lot numbers, the incinerator logs. She watched his face for the tiny betrayals of guilt. The licking of the lips, the tightening at the eyes. It happened the way slow things happen. Not like a confession in a flash, but like a series of small unpickings. Hale's words started as deflection, moved to rationalization, and finally, under pressure and backed by concrete evidence, to a ragged stammer. He said, voice low and measured, I wanted him scared. He had to back off the report. That company, it wasn't about money only. It was reputation. He was going to destroy years of work. He paused, swallowed. I didn't plan to kill him. We meant to make him leave, to discredit him. The chamber, we thought it would be a scare. We sealed a small cavern to make a point. We didn't calculate the freeze. His hands, which had always been steady on cameras and podiums, trembled. Rhea watched him speak, watched his practiced defenses fall into brittle confession. It was not a dramatic outburst. It was a man unraveling quietly, naming choices that had a human cost. He admitted to ordering the nocturnal delivery, to instructing teams to remove Elias's survival gear, and to placing the lanterns, a grotesque measure to mark days of silence. He insisted he wanted the scientists to feel the mountain's power and sign a retraction. The detective kept her expression still, pen poised. The last thing she wrote that night was a simple line: confession, partial, coerced intent, death unintended but foreseeable. When the interview ended, the air in the station felt different. A slow, aching relief threaded through the room, but also something heavier: knowledge that a man's reputation and a corporation's empire had been built on decisions that led to another human being left to die. Nora pressed her palm to her mouth and let out the breath she'd been holding for years. Act 4 closes on that image. Victor Hale's voice trailing into the cold, Detective Rhea Voss's neat handwriting filling a page, Nora Klein standing by the window as snow dusted the ridge like ash, and the small, terrible constellation of facts that would carry the case into court. The confession was not the end. It was a beginning, one that would demand a verdict, and that would ask the Valley to decide what to do with a truth that tasted like ice and iron. The courtroom in Anchorage was silent that morning, too silent for a case that had gripped the world. Reporters packed the aisles, cameras ready, but even their lenses seemed to hesitate as Victor Hale took the stand. Behind him, screens projected images from the Glacier, the ice chamber where Dr. Elias Monroe had been found, seated upright, surrounded by 7 extinguished lanterns. Detective Rhea Voss sat near the front, her notes stacked neatly, her pen motionless. For months, she had dismantled Hale Dynamics layer by layer: financial records, falsified reports, encrypted emails. It wasn't just a disappearance anymore. It was a corporate cover-up wrapped in a frozen tomb. When the prosecutor began, the air thickened. "Mr. Hale," the lawyer said, pacing slowly, "you funded Dr. Monroe's research. You provided his equipment, his route, even his safety permits. You had control over every aspect of that mission, didn't you?" Victor smiled, that same sterile corporate smile he'd worn for years. "Control? No," he said coolly. "Support, yes. Elias was a friend. His death was a tragedy." Rhea almost laughed. Almost. The word friend sat like frostbite in her ears. She remembered what Nora Klein told her, how Hale had pushed Elias to falsify Glacier stability data, how Elias refused, how 2 days before his disappearance, he'd received a message from Hale's private line that read, "You're not helping us, Elias. You're holding us back." Then came the real blow, the forensic team's report. The ice chamber wasn't natural. It had been formed by directed heat signatures, consistent with controlled drilling and artificial freezing. Hale Dynamics had been experimenting with ice containment structures for years, under the guise of environmental monitoring. Elias had stumbled upon the prototype site. The courtroom screens changed, now showing the recovered audio log from Elias's recorder, found clipped to his parka. The static faded, and his voice trembled through the speakers. "If you're hearing this, they found the vents. The glacier's not melting from above, it's burning from below. They're trying to trap the methane. It's not containment, it's ignition." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Rhea glanced at Hale. His jaw was tight, his confidence thinning. For once, the man who'd built empires out of frozen land looked small, melting under the weight of truth. When the verdict was finally read, no one breathed. On all counts of negligence, data manipulation, and conspiracy leading to the death of Dr. Elias Monroe, we find the defendant, Victor Hale, guilty. The gavel struck once, echoing like a crack through old ice. Outside, reporters swarmed. Microphones reached like claws. Rhea walked past them, her coat collar up, face calm but eyes distant. Nora Klein found her on the courthouse steps, a folded paper in her hand. "It's from his field journal," Nora said softly. "The last page." Rhea unfolded it. Elias's handwriting, trembling but deliberate, read, "If they bury me in the ice, let it speak for me. Nature always remembers its thieves." For a long time, Rhea didn't speak. She just looked toward the snow peaks glinting in the distance, the same range that had swallowed Elias. Weeks later, as cleanup crews dismantled Hail Dynamics' remote base, workers found something strange inside the containment vaults. 7 new lanterns, perfectly aligned, unlit, like a silent echo of the Glacier tomb. No one knew who placed them there. Some said it was Nora, a tribute to the man who died protecting the truth. Others said Rhea herself left them, a final warning to those who'd ever think they could harness nature for profit. But those who were there swear the lanterns weren't new. Their brass was weathered, their glass fogged, as if they'd been burning once long ago. And when the last vault was sealed, one worker swore he heard a faint sound behind the ice, a voice barely there, whispering beneath layers of frost and years of silence. It's not dying. It's breathing. The story of Dr. Elias Monroe became a global symbol of resistance, of truth frozen in time, and of one man who refused to let science be sold. Environmentalists began lighting 7 lanterns at protests around the world, each representing a principle Elias had lived by. Truth, duty, nature, courage, loss, legacy, and light. Detective Rhea Voss never took credit for solving it. She retired a year later, moved north, and spent her evenings by the shoreline, sometimes staring at the horizon where the glacier's pale reflection shimmered under the dying sun. And every year, on the night Elias vanished, a faint glow is seen on the frozen ridges. 7 flickers in the dark, breathing softly against the wind. The world calls them the Lanterns of Monroe. Rhea calls them his promise, still alive beneath the ice. If you think nature always forgets what we bury in it, think again. Because sometimes it remembers, in the coldest, most haunting ways. Follow for more true stories that prove the Earth keeps its own secrets.